an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Season 4, Episode 10, I Can Work With You. In this episode, Rebecca finally has to face the weird fears that she's been having surrounding Daryl's kid, who's technically her daughter, and Paula has to deal with the weird fears she has around acknowledging her own success. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Megan for commissioning this episode. So, this one was a bit of I kind of am going back and forth on how I feel about it, because for the most part, I actually really enjoyed it. I am always a fan of seeing characters interact who aren't main characters, like on their own terms, and this show is really good about letting characters do that frequently. So it's been a major strength of theirs, and getting Nathaniel and Josh head to head was very fun. Also, the whole thing with Hector and Valencia, I had forgotten that she was mean to him, that was like an ongoing thing. And yet, I don't feel like anybody ever actually deals with the real reasons that they have problems with one another, you know? So we'll get to that. But that I found kind of, I did really like Paula not telling anybody about her graduation and having like technically a graduation party, but not telling anybody that's what it's for. That feels like an extremely Paula thing to do. And for me, I've mentioned before the parallels that I see sometimes in Rebecca and Paula's relationship and my relationship with Rashawn, because I feel like a Rebecca a lot of the time. I can be a major taker, and Rashawn will give because she doesn't want to be a taker herself, and she's very aware of it, and so she does things to her own detriment for the sake of like keeping things sort of peaceful. And she would do this exact type of thing. I have no doubt that she would graduate law school and not fucking tell anybody. Rashawn, if you're listening, I can hear you being mad because I'm right. And you know I'm right, that that's what you would do. And I would be the person who would find out that she had graduated and not invited me. 1, never forgive her. And 2, definitely throw a party, not tell her that I was throwing it. And then she would be like, it would be a surprise graduation party. And she would be like low-key irritated because she said she didn't want it, but then she'd have a good time and she'd be mad that she had a good time, but she'd also be glad. So that's that tiny short story about how things would go, because this is the sort of thing that, before having been friends with Rashawn, I would not have been able to understand this mindset at all. To me, if I get an excuse to have a party, you better fucking believe I'm going to do it. Oh my God. I always want to throw a party, you know? The only thing that's been difficult is like, I live somewhere where I don't have any of my own friends living nearby, and so I haven't been able to invite my people, and that's been the main hindrance, but I've still thrown parties. And if I lived near people like Paula does, if I worked with people who were my friends, yeah, my house would be the party house, especially since I don't have kids. You know, most people my age, they're getting to a point where they're thinking about having kids, and I say most people, like most people in relationships, you know, just seems to be that I'm in the minority of just not being interested at all. And so oftentimes the people who are single wind up being the party people. And I am fine with that. That's like part of why I don't want a kid, is so that I can remain the party person. So this episode, first of all, I wanted to ask you guys, you know how there's like the previously on? The previously on shows this moment where Rebecca's talking to Valencia about the fact that all these guys showed up at her house last episode. I don't remember that conversation. Did we see this? I saw, like, every other bit of this I remembered, but that was the one that I didn't I don't remember if that was a scene that we saw or if they were doing a funny thing like Community did a clips show where all of the clips are episodes that we never saw. They're clips from things that never happened on the actual show, which made it very funny. But I don't think that's what they were doing. I think I just must have missed something. So the episode begins with Rebecca handing out pretzel samples that taste terrible because they are called the hot mess and they are meant to reflect her life and what a mess it is. Rebecca, stop it. Okay? Stop it. This feels much too self-pitying. You had a dude that you were going to, like, sleep with and 2 exes who were clearly still obsessed with you showing up at your house. Yeah, your life's a mess, sure. But, like, that's a pretty baller situation in its way. And as much as I understand it being frustrating and confusing, I don't really feel that bad for you. I only feel bad that that one guy decided to leave and just ghosted you. That sucks. But otherwise, come on. These dudes are clearly still into you, and you have to know that. When Greg finally eventually tells her that he has feelings for her, and she's all like, what? I'm like, what did you think he was going to say? What? Just honestly. Maybe I shouldn't have felt that way because she told him that she slept with his dad, and maybe she was expecting him to, like, kind of come at her about that. But it seemed very obvious to me. If I were her, that's what I would have expected him to be coming to talk about, because that was the direction the conversation started going before she told him. And the fact that he wants to talk to her at all, the fact that he turned up at her door, there's clearly a whole other thing happening. But anyway, so yeah, she's making these samples and complaining about her life. Daryl comes up and sort of like, it says something about the baby. She reacts with like, who? When he says Rebecca. I just need to do an aside here, guys, and say how upset I am that he's decided to stick with the name Rebecca. White Josh said that it was quite terrible. You had an opportunity to change it, dude. What are you doing? This poor child. But anyway, that's her name. And when he mentions her and Rebecca's like, who? He finally straight up is like, all right, look, what the fuck? You gave me an egg. You went through hormone treatments. It was extremely unpleasant and I would assume pretty memorable. And you just forget that she exists. And it's weird. And what's your deal? And he has one of these moments where she's clearly like saying something to him and he doesn't hear it. She's saying something to him about herself. And she says, yeah, you're weird around her. It's like you can barely even look at her because she reminds you of a traumatic time in your life where you made rash decisions and contributed to the existence of another person and didn't fully think it through. And he says, what? I don't look at her like that at all. And I'm like, dude, here, listen, here with your ears. And this was really interesting because it didn't occur to me that the issue Rebecca would be having would be about the time in her life where she made this choice. I thought it was going to be about her genetic makeup, which it, of course is still a factor for her. And she mentions that a little bit later. But for me, this is also a big part of why I don't want to have children. Owen's family has a history of mental illness issues and mental disability. My family has a history of mental illness issues, like a lot. Alcoholism and cancer, really prevalent in my family. And I'm just not really feeling super confident that a child that we had would have a great time. I feel like the deck would be majorly stacked against it. And I'm not interested in, 1, putting that on another living being. 2, being responsible for a living being dealing with all of those issues. And 3, the second one, times 1,000. Like, just, it's too much. You know, my own self, I am not handling my life well. It's okay. It's better, but it's not great. And I'm not ready to level up, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to be, and I'm fine with that. And so Rebecca's feelings of like, oh my God, I didn't decide to like raise a kid, but I definitely put my genetics into another person. I would definitely get it if that were the main thing that she's sort of freaking out here. But instead, it's more like the combination of that and the time in which she did it being a really tumultuous time, and the fact that she didn't really think it through, which we saw how little she considered what it would be like for her dealing with her personality disorder at the same time as like these giant hormone waves. So yeah, she didn't really think it through. She's not wrong about that. And at this point, Daryl asks her if she would babysit. And she does that thing that you do where you're like, sure, maybe someday. Where you just say maybe someday with the intention of either never doing it or hoping that you'll totally change as a person eventually. And then you're going to suddenly want to do the thing. It's like how people will be like, I don't know, maybe someday I'll run like a marathon. And when they say maybe someday, it's like, maybe someday I'll just completely turn into someone who wants totally different things than what I want right now out of my life. But then he suddenly asks her specifically 6:45 on Saturday. And it turns out that he got set up on a date and his nanny is busy and he really wants to be able to get out there again. We find out later that the date he was set up on was with a pharmacist. And that she wants to be an influencer. And when they were at the restaurant, she stood on the chair and took photos of the food. Now, I know this isn't the point, but allow me, everybody, to just give you a tiny bit. If you follow my Instagram, which is, I think, at BossyFatBabe right now, I take really good pictures of food. Like, if I wanted to make that a living, I might be able to pull that off. I don't have a professional camera. That aside, I'm pretty good at it. And the last thing you want to do to take a good photo of food is stand on a chair. Food does not look as good from far away unless you're getting a whole table setting. If you're trying to get the look of like a Thanksgiving feast, or if you've got gorgeous plates or a centerpiece, then fine. If you've got a dish that looks fantastic, though, you don't pull back. Sometimes you don't even want to be able to see the whole thing. The key to good food photos is getting up close and really getting people to see the texture of everything and natural light. Those are the keys. Food does not look good under your kitchen lights in the middle of the evening. It just doesn't. You can do your best to edit it and make it look a little bit cooler temperature. Still difficult. Get closer, not further away. Get it off center. Find the spot on the salmon that's charred, where the sauce is just dripping over the side. And you can see like the piled up avocado on top. That's all like, and the rice and a little steam coming off it. And you get right up in there. Because I'll tell you what, nothing makes food look more inert than distance. It's just nothing. Food is meant to feel like you are climbing into bed with it, you know? And that's, you know, this is part of like the whole, like, I'm going too far with this. I'm just saying if that's something that you're interested in, that's my advice. So she's going to be a bad influencer, maybe never get to be an influencer at all. And somebody needs to tell her this stuff. So Samantha says, taking notes for the next time I'm proud of something I cook that I want to post about. See, this is what I want. I am looking forward to seeing posts on my feed of people who know how to photograph their food. Nothing makes me sadder than somebody posting a photo of a dish that they made that they're proud of, and I know that it probably tasted good, but the photo is repulsive. And that happens a lot because people don't understand the optics of good food. They just take a photo and they're like, well, you get it. We don't. I promise. That just looks like somebody ate it already. Don't. Just get up close, cool the lighting down a little bit sometimes, maybe pump the color up because the phone will wash it out. And, you know, just like texture, baby, texture. So, okay. We have then this scene. This is an odd one. I don't know what to make of this. We've got the AA meeting that Greg is at with his dad. And his dad gets up and's apologizing to Greg for sleeping with Rebecca. And it turns out that he already talked about this with Greg privately, and they already talked about it in session the day before. They came to a meeting previously, and he already talked about it. And it's an interesting thing because we have this scene, but we never actually get the one-on-one interaction between Greg and his father. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, if that's a choice the show is making because they're going to have him coping with that later, or if they just didn't feel like it was totally necessary or what. But I thought it was strange to have them have this like one-on-one, and then later Greg, or not one-on-one, this group moment, and then later the one-on-one that Greg has is with the guy who's running the meeting and not with his own father. And I really thought that that was like sort of puzzling. I wanted to see them interacting over this a little bit more, and the idea that his father keeps apologizing, this feels like the kind of thing that would definitely happen when you've done something you really, not only that you deeply regret, but that you did in the grips of an addiction, because you're just sort of like, he says to the group when he's talking about it, that was definitely his rock bottom. And rock bottom is meant to be something that you almost cannot believe you got to that point. A moment where you're like, wow, that was truly despicable. I think of myself as a good person, and I cannot square that circle. I can't possibly be a good person when I also did this fucking thing. Holy shit. However, the fact that he keeps subjecting Greg to his apologies when Greg is making it very clear he feels that the matter is closed and that they sort of dealt with it already, makes it feel a lot less like it's about Greg and much more like it's him not knowing how to cope with his guilt. And here again, I recommend therapy. You know, like everybody in the show is getting therapy and trying to deal with trauma and figuring out a way around shit that they just, you know, have never really dealt with in their lives. And I feel like this would be a good time for that for him. He is putting it on Greg, and there's a difference between like confessing and trying to like make something right, or at the very least just be honest with a person. There, you can't always make things right, unfortunately. That's not the way it goes. But there's a difference between that and forcing somebody else to like forgive you in a way that is really meant to be more about you than them actually coming to peace with something. And so when I say that I wanted the like one-on-one interaction between Greg and his dad, that's really what I was looking for, was more of a moment where Greg tells his dad, hey, I know you're sorry, but this isn't about you anymore. And if you want it to be, you got to stop coming to me with it, because I am the wronged party and my labor isn't the thing that you need in order to feel better. And it shouldn't be something that you're demanding of me. But what he winds up getting into here is that conversation with the guy who's leading the meeting, who tells him, you really need to cope with the feelings about Rebecca. You've talked about what happened and you never actually told her how you feel. And that's something that you have to deal with. So what's your plan? And he realizes that he really does need to go and talk to her. So then we have Rebecca getting invited to this party that Paula is throwing unbeknownst to anybody as a sort of celebration of the fact that she graduated law school. And Rebecca has just told Daryl that she's going to be babysitting that night, so she can't go. And Paula is wondering who she should ask because they need even numbers for teams for the game. And Rebecca recommends Josh Chan, which is great. And I just love this when she says, like, your new BFF, Josh Chan, and Paula is like, oh, you know what? After that trip to San Bernardino, I actually do kind of like that guy. And then when she says, you know, and I need a sofa moved, and my water cooler has been empty for weeks. Oh, I love it. I love it so much. Can I just say, guys, Josh Chan has appeared in his underwear in every episode for like the last 2, 3, maybe 4 episodes of this show. And I have no problem with it. 0 problem with it. I am good with it. Just throwing that out there. So, then comes the meetup between him and Nathaniel at home base. I really enjoyed this little scene between the two of them because you guys know how much contempt I had for Josh in the first couple seasons of this show because he's really immature. And now at least he's trying and he recognizes some of the immaturities in himself and is attempting to rectify them. But Nathaniel, you know, I have said many times how like we're meant to sort of overlook what a dick he is. But he's also working on that, and yet I'm uncomfortable with some of the things in his personality that I also see in myself. He regards Josh with such open contempt, and I just really felt it in my guts. Like, later on, there's a moment where where Josh asks if Marvin Gaye was shot by his own father when he was an adult. And Nathaniel says, no, Josh, as a baby. All the music by Marvin Gaye that you love, he made as a baby. And I swear to God, you guys, my internal monologue sounds like that so often. I will be in conversation with somebody. I will be listening to a conversation, perhaps, if I'm like at a table and there's like multiple conversations going on at an event or at a restaurant. I will be watching something with people who are having conversations with one another. And I will have that kind of snide, like, obviously, you dumb bitch. Oh my God, of course that's what she meant. Jesus Christ, what kind of idiot. That is a thing that goes on in my head. And I am aware that I am very harsh to a point that doesn't entirely make sense. I know people can be dicks in their internal monologue, but I have often been startled at how mean my voice in my head can be. And this whole thing with Nathaniel and Josh, I really felt it because it's one of the first times that I have really related to Nathaniel in like a way that I feel upset about. And he's reacting to somebody who I previously really didn't like, but whom I sort of wound up respecting throughout this episode because Josh is a lot more direct than Nathaniel is about it. And Josh is sort of how I wish that I could be with people that I don't like very much because, you know, the whole thing with Nathaniel is that he's a wasp, right? And when you're a wasp, you're trained to never have actual confrontations. You are meant to avoid them at all costs, but make comments that let somebody know how you feel without ever actually saying it. Josh doesn't approach things that way. He's like, dude, I know you don't like me. I don't like you either. It's fine. And I just really appreciated throughout this convo how much he is the one that's like really getting at the subtext of what Nathaniel is saying to him. So first, Nathaniel says, no, after you, Mr. Man Panties. And Josh just stops and says, excuse me? Which immediately I was like, good for you, dude. Because a lot of people would just be like, wow, cool, thanks. And they would have let it go. But Josh is like, no, we're going to talk about this right the fuck now. And Nathaniel says, yeah, that ridiculous underwear you were wearing on the patio the other night, the panties, which, what about it? And indeed, Josh replies with, I was in my own house, and they are not panties. They are very expensive Fet by Fet Regoso high-performance moisture-wicking briefs cut high for gluteal mobility. I post a picture in them every day to attract the attention of Fet Regoso Inc., who are looking for online brand spokesmen. And Nathaniel just says, wow with you. Wow. Again, just a dick fucking, like, he's not saying anything. Josh's repost. Okay, trust me. I don't like you any more than you like me, so wow yourself. Good for you, man. Good for you, sir. And then Nathaniel says, you know what? I don't actually dislike you. We are just wildly different. You are on a different planet. We have nothing in common. Well, if you don't dislike him, and it's just about the fact that you're different, maybe you should look at why you're being so mean. Because the whole thing that you're supposedly doing is not being an asshole anymore. But you are, right now, for no reason. You're just mocking the fact that he was wearing men's briefs. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about the fact that I don't feel like they actually deal with what problems they have. Because later on, what they do is bond over sports analogies. And there's a whole song about sports analogies being a substitute for dealing with actual emotion in men, which I'm certain is a thing, but I personally have never dated a guy who was into sports, really, not seriously dated. And so I haven't seen this sort of thing firsthand. My dad was into soccer, but he wasn't into it the way people get into sports. It was more like he got excited when the World Cup was happening, kind of thing. Other than that, this wasn't really a thing for the men in my life growing up, and I haven't been romantically involved with guys who give a shit about sports, so it's all very sort of hypothetical for me. The only person I've ever had in my life that has been consistently caring about sports has always been father-in-laws. Brendan's father was a Patriots fan, super into football, and Owen's grandfather is, of course, a Cowboys fan. And just doesn't really... So, I understand what they're doing here with the, sports analogy bit. And the song was actually pretty funny. And I really appreciated that it's sort of it's a lounge lizard, Mad Men, constant smoking and drinking way too much. And I also really love how at the end their own fathers don't want to clap for them. Really well done. That was a very good touch. But that's sort of treated we just needed to learn a language that we can both understand. And I don't think that's the problem here. I think Nathaniel is still low-key jealous of Josh. He knows that Rebecca had been obsessed with him and moved here for him, and now she's living with him, and the dude is jacked. Let's be honest, okay? You're dating somebody and you are dumped unceremoniously. You still have major feelings for them. You go to their house to tell them that you think you're still in love with them, and their ex, who is absolutely fucking smoking hot, wanders out in their underwear. That's the problem, man. It's not the fact that you guys don't have anything in common. It's that he's a threat. And he's not. We know that he's not. Well, I say that. We don't know that he's not, because she had the birds twittering and the twinkly music when she looked at him. So he might be right to be threatened by him. But I'm just saying, it felt like we sort of sidestepped the actual issue in favor of making it sort of comedic how they managed to connect after all once they figured it out. And I don't think that works because that's not what the problem actually is between the two of them. And similarly, there's a thing with Valencia and Hector where she's been super mean to him all these years. And when they finally are alone together, it comes out that she is jealous of the fact that everybody likes him and he's super likable without having to try. Whereas, you know, it's more difficult for her. People don't like her as easily. And I don't, like, that doesn't really quite ring for me. I thought that she for sure would mention the fact that he was, like, voted class president too, because, like, if that were a thing, if they had run against each other and he won and it turned out that nobody really liked her as much, I could see that being something that she would, like, nurse forever. But otherwise, it just sort of, I would have liked there to be more of a basis to it than simple, like, jealousy. And it's weird because, like, the jealousy thing is, I think, an issue for Josh and Nathaniel, but that's just completely not addressed at all. And then jealousy turns out to be a motivating factor between her and Hector, where I'm like, really? And Hector is just basically like, I think you're really smart and cool and fashionable, and I would like to be friends. I mean, what if she were reacting this way because she could tell he didn't like her? Because that's something that happens, especially when you are used to getting, like, Valencia is somebody who, being beautiful and being, like, sort of goals for a lot of women for how they would like to look, and a lot of guys for a woman they would like to date, would be sort of used to being treated a certain way. And if Hector didn't treat her that way, and she reacted badly to that, and then we find out that he treated her kind of shitty because he saw that she was kind of shitty to Josh, which she was. We saw the way that she was acting when she was dating Josh, and she's changed a lot since then. But I would sort of enjoy it if that were addressed. If it were that she was like, well, you've always been an asshole to me. And he's like, I mean, I was, yeah, years ago when you were dating one of my best friends and you were being a complete cunt to him. I've sort of gotten over that, but you haven't seemed to get over the fact that I acted this way, like, years ago at this point. My opinion on you has changed, but clearly your opinion on me hasn't changed in return. I feel like that would be slightly more interesting, because there's also the fact that she is such a driven person, and he hasn't been. I mean, the whole joke with him in the first couple seasons was that he lived with his mother, he had like 40 alarm clocks, and he still didn't wake up on time because he didn't really have a consistent job, and so he had nowhere to be. She could have an issue with that. This just feels a little flat to me, you know? It feels a little bit too easy. I do really enjoy him being afraid of her as like an ongoing joke, though, and I really enjoy her turning it around when he's like, you're not gonna keep yelling at me, and she's like, no, you're a fan. I love my fans. Honestly, that was a really great reaction. Like, that's exactly the kind of response that I want from Valencia, is to treat a person who she knows personally, who is sitting beside her, as if they are, quote, a fan instead of a friend. That's on brand. I really enjoy that a lot. So, all right. We have the invite to the party that Josh gets while he's talking to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel assumes incorrectly that Rebecca is going to be there. And then we find out later, you know, we see him get informed that she won't be, and the disappointment on his face. I loved that. I'm sure we've all had this when you're like sort of interested in somebody, but you aren't actually like making it obvious yet. And you go to an event hoping they'll be there. There is nothing as heartbreaking as finding out you got this whole fucking sick outfit together and spent an hour and a half on your hair, and then they aren't coming. Oh, it's the worst. That is so disappointing. So Rebecca comes to Daryl's house, and he assures her that the baby is absolutely no trouble. She never wakes up, barely even cries. And she wishes him luck on the date and begins her chill evening watching 90210 marathons, or a marathon. Then she gets a text from Greg. And he asks if he can come by. And everything seems chill. So she's like, sure. And then, of course, as soon as she says sure, the baby wakes up, begins to cry. And so they were about to have their like intense conversation. But now they have to deal with this crying baby. And let's see, Samantha says, like Rebecca in the first episode with the sexy getting ready song. Exactly. Yes. I forgot that they have that whole thing where he doesn't even show up. That's right. So she is struggling with getting this baby to calm down. And Greg, when he comes in, is able to do it in like 2 seconds. And this is when she is honest with him about how she's been avoiding this baby because she was so sure the baby was going to hate her. And this feels very relatable to me. Obviously, I would never go through the whole thing that she went through in order to give an egg. But I would, if I were to have done this, I feel like I would have a very similar fear. It's just, it's totally understandable to me, you know? And this turns into a shame spiral. This is what she calls it this. And she tells Greg later that this is a literal thing that people with this personality disorder have. And I really appreciated her actually addressing it like in sort of clinical terms, you know, because like it's important to recognize what's happening like mentally when you're going through something like this, because it helps give you a little bit of distance and keep it in perspective that like, okay, this feels very real to me, and it is real, but also it's like a symptom of another thing. And so it's not necessarily as true as it feels like it is right now. And that's really key. So she says, this is like the thing that she says, the best thing for her is for me to stay as far away as possible. I've done enough damage bringing her into this world and giving her my garbage genes. I just need to stay far away from her because I bring out the worst in her. I bring out the worst in everybody, even babies. And he just tells her to stop, and she says, come on, you know it's true. You left West Covina just to get away from me, and look how well you're doing. And clearly, everyone is better off without me. Just face it. And he says, if everyone was better off without you, then why did I come here to tell you I can't stop thinking about you? I miss you and I still have feelings for you. And she's just like, oh, what? So I really love this because they wind up like making out and eventually they have sex, but she stops him when he goes and like brings the baby into the other room and they're about to start making out again. And she's like, I was in the midst of a shame spiral and I just need to know that I'm not making out with you because I'm using your opinion of me to like bolster myself. And I really loved that whole moment. And I love the fact that he understood what she meant and was respecting the fact that this was a fear of hers. And instead of acting like it was ridiculous. And it's a fascinating thing to sort of watch how this show copes with her realizations and the spirals and things like that. I don't know how many episodes are left in the series, but I think there's 6 or 7? There's still time. I'm just wondering if things are going to steadily get better for her or if we're going to have a regression. I feel like I kind of want a regression for the sake of realism because mental illness is like that. You feel like you're making a lot of progress and then you'll just be hit by a fucking train and you'll feel like, oh, I'm never, ever, ever going to be okay again. Oh, I just have been lying to myself, trying to make myself think that I'll be okay. But that's not for me. Being okay is not for me. That's not who I am. That's not how it'll ever work out. And you have to learn how to get through those times. That's part of the deal with mental illness is that it's cyclical. And, the fact that she has figured out what her diagnosis is and she has been implementing the treatments and actually using the tactics and tools she's been given to cope is amazing. But also, we're not always able to do that. We're not always at our best. And I'm interested to see what happens when she gets like into a shame spiral and there isn't a Greg there to tell her that she's great, you know, and that it's okay. And in terms of the like realization that that's what was happening, so the whole thing with like her having the personality disorder, last week I woke up in the middle of the night. It was about 4:00 in the morning, having a panic attack, which I didn't even realize was something that could happen without a trigger. I always thought a panic attack was set off by something. And it turns out that's not necessarily true. Panic attacks can just happen to you. It's a burst of adrenaline. And I had it in the middle of being dead asleep. I woke up gasping with a sense of get out of the bed and sprint away, run. And it wasn't like a nightmare. I have had nightmares and I remember them when I wake up and I think, oh God, that was scary. I don't want to fall back into that. This was not that. And I was wide awake for the next 4 hours, which was hell because my adrenaline was just in my system. If it hadn't been so late, I would have come in here and like done a workout because I was just so awake, but Owen was still asleep and it was going to be too loud. And in that time, I was looking up panic attacks and how they work because this was new to me. I've never been woken up by one before. And I began to follow some clues and wound up down a rabbit hole where I discovered a personality disorder called obsessive compulsive personality disorder. I have often called myself OCD, but it hasn't actually felt completely right because that has been described as something that people do compulsively but not wanting to. And then when I looked up the OCD personality disorder, OCPD, the definitive like difference between the two of them is described as OCD people do something that they don't want to be doing, but feel compelled to do. OCPD people think the thing they are doing is correct. And everything about the symptoms, except for like one or two things, were dead fucking on, to the point where as I was reading the symptoms, I started crying because I felt like I was being seen in my soul for the first time in my entire life. Everything about the description of who these people are was me. And I have not been officially diagnosed. I haven't seen a psychiatrist and talked about this with anybody, but I am certain in my bones that this is what's going on. And I've talked a lot about, like on the show, about the contempt that I have for people all the time and how I know that that's not like cool, you know, and I've sort of accepted it as like a quirk of my own personality, but it has always sort of alarmed me because even though everyone around me is aware that I'm like that, they don't even know how bad it is. They hear like the softened version that I put out into the world, which is still incredibly harsh, but it's not even as bad as it was in my head. So I've often thought, my God, why am I like this? Why am I so hard on everybody? I'm so hard on myself. And then reading this thing, it all became clear. And so then I have to go out into the world and recognize this behavior that I have and see it happening. And realize, oh my God, that's what I'm doing. This is the OCPD talking. This is like, I thought that this was just me having obscene standards because of who I am as a person. And that is part of it. I mean, a personality disorder is part of who you are as a person. That's the thing about it, right? But putting a name to it and being able to be like, okay, yeah, but this isn't something that's like necessarily normal. And it is something that you can learn to cope with. Makes me feel so much better about it. It's not just something that I have to live with and just be this way. And the shame spiral thing that she has here and the fact that she's able to step back and be like, okay, that's what was happening. Deep breath. I can't just engage in sexual behavior with you right away right now because I am now conscious of what was happening there. it's just the kind of thing that I hope to be able to do as I move forward with the awareness that this is something that I'm dealing with. And when I start to really get into my head about like perfectionism on certain things, I have to pull out of it and be like, okay, girl, this is not how you want to approach this. Remember. So I admire this moment a lot, and it's like kind of goals, honestly. It's crucial that he be there to sort of like break it, because she starts to get into this, like, it's like she's getting onto the highway, and he manages to just put some cones up and divert her back off the entrance and onto an exit. And if he hadn't been there, I don't know how this would have gone. Because once you start getting into a place where you're like, the world is better without me, everybody here does better if I'm not involved, it's a very short leap from there to, I should just be dead. I don't want that for her. And I'm worried that he was what stopped her from continuing down that road. Because what if he hadn't been there, she's able to get this distance and realize what's happening, but it's because they have that pause where they start making out and he has to take the kid in the other room. Ugh, it just makes me very nervous. So the whole thing with like them sleeping together and them talking over whether or not this can actually be a thing and that they can try again. I don't know I'm curious how you all felt about this, because I really get the feeling from the way that they have Valencia and Heather saying, well, obviously Greg is the one you're supposed to be with. I interpreted that as the show nodding to fans who all have been thinking this, throughout. Fans who have all been sort of wondering, is Greg ever going to come back? What's the deal? I never wondered that. It's not that I never wondered that. I was not preoccupied by it. I didn't really care. I really enjoyed the arc that happened with Greg and the fact that he just decided to leave. If he had come back earlier, I wouldn't have really known what to expect. Him coming back as like a completely differently cast person is a choice. And as I've said, I don't feel the chemistry between the two of them 100%. I don't think I want her with anybody. And I'm struggling with like wanting her as a character to find happiness, because I know that she would like to be with somebody. That is something that a lot of people want. And so I don't want to be like, oh, well, if you have this issue, you shouldn't be in a relationship, because that's just a fucked up thing to say. Like, I don't believe that. But I'm not worried about it in a way that it feels like other people are. And by other people, I mean like other fans of the show, based on the way that they like seemed to be lampshading this, I am not that worried about it. So I think that might be why the romance like question and these men who are still involved in her life hasn't been hitting for me this season, because it just doesn't really feel like something I should be focusing on when she has other very real issues that she still hasn't completely dealt with. Like the pretzel business thing. I am actually very curious about how that's going, how she paid for it, all of the stuff that went into that. I want to know more about, and I was hoping that we would get more of it rather than it just being a background thing that she frequently just walks away from. I would have loved if we got an episode of her at work realizing how hard retail work is and beginning to sort of rethink everything, because that's something that happens to people who were like working in a professional atmosphere and they gave it up because they wanted to go into something that was service related. I've seen people do this a number of times, and I worked for women who used to be in the advertising industry and they quit to open a bakery, and they both basically flat out said they regretted it. And it was clear that they didn't like it. I worked for them and it was a miserable fucking job. And they clearly just didn't know what they were getting into when they did it. And they didn't know how to run a business like that effectively. And it showed. And Rebecca has no history with any of that. And I know how hard that sort of thing is, even as a layman. I've never owned a business like that. That's something that is like purely about her and what she's capable of and how she handles problems and totally new life experiences that I find really fascinating. That has nothing to do with who she's going to wind up with. And I really, really would like some more of that, you know? But I feel like we keep coming back to this relationship well. And I don't think any of these dudes are particularly great for her. I just like, even Greg, it's like he's out of the ones that we've seen, he's the best option in terms of his like overall attitude towards life, his intelligence, his, you know, his drive now that he's like started going back to school and whatnot. But I don't feel like he's a great match. He just seems like the best of the options we've seen. And I would be very surprised if somebody like better for her wasn't out there somewhere. And I just feel like this is very limiting. And I want to not focus on this anymore. As like, I'm just worried because Greg is back. And it feels like he's back for the rest of the series based on what's been said. And I just don't want that to mean what I think it's going to mean. Does that make sense? So yeah, this is just, I don't know. I really would love to hear from you guys on whether or not you feel the same way. If you like, am I alone in this? Because this is sort of what I was hoping to avoid this season based on the progress that she was making with getting diagnosed and getting therapy and realizing how toxic her relationships have been. I really thought that it meant we were going to pull away from the like romantic aspect of things. And it would be a little bit just less about that. And it hasn't happened. And there's not that long, like more to the show. There's like 7 episodes, I think I said. That might not be right. But I don't know if we've got time at this point to give her that space to breathe. After this episode seems to end with her talking to Paula about hooking up with Greg and being really excited about it. It feels like we're transitioning into a thing. Now, that said, it could go a different way, I guess, where because she does get in a committed relationship with Greg, it becomes less about who is she going to wind up with and more about her because now she's in a stable relationship and so dating isn't so much a focus anymore. I guess I could see that because sometimes that's the thing. Like you put so much energy into dating, so much energy into like finding a partner that once you do find somebody, you're able to like turn around and reinvest that energy into yourself because you're feeling more stable and supported. That would be good, you know? I just don't really have a great sense of how that looks with Greg because in the past he hasn't been like a stable, supportive influence. And I don't know how that would even work. I don't see him like moving in with her, but maybe. And if he were to do that, then like what happens to Josh? And does that dynamic get weird? Anyway, I wanted to like be honest with y'all about where I'm at because I started to really piece together how I haven't been as hot on this season as previous ones. And I really think that's at the heart of it. I was saying that Rebecca being better now, like than she was in terms of dealing with her obsession and the ridiculous shit she was doing was less entertaining to watch. And that's certainly true. But it could still be like compelling and entertaining if we put her in situations where she's just less sure of herself. And focusing on this new business, I mean, there is nothing like retail experiences for comedy. People are ridiculous. Working in food service is ridiculous. And she has no idea what she's doing. There's really no reason for this to be going well which I'm supposed to believe it is. So I feel like that's a real untapped resource. And again, we may get this and I'll be just looking back on this episode like, wow, I talked for a long time about wanting a thing that everybody knew was coming and they must have been so bored. So anyway, let's talk about the party that Paula has, because it's super uncomfortable. The whole thing is meant to be like charades and celebrities, but with people who were in famous like cases, trials. And her and her husband go up and just nail like 5 in a row. Once they started doing it, I began to realize like how the game was meant to be played. But I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have gotten like any of those. I really wouldn't. I don't think I got the premise of it until they started to play it. So that's part of it. But I really appreciated Hector just going up and saying pass over and over again, because I mean, I feel like that's where I would have been also. Oh God. Yeah, it's excruciating. So yeah, they get up there, they do amazing. And then it's Josh and Nathaniel is coming at this like with a really competitive vibe. And Josh and him just don't speak the same language at all. And he gets mad and they go outside and they talk about it. They have the sports analogies song, which is, like I said, pretty funny. Not something that I relate to, but I get it. And then they come back in and they sort of crush it. Like they definitely don't beat Paula and her husband, but they do really well. We never actually see the team up between Heather and what is Valencia's girlfriend's name? You guys tell me every single week and I always forget. Rowan says panic attacks are the worst. They always ruin me for at least a day after. Oh yeah. I was unprepared for that, Rowan, for like how long I felt shitty after that panic attack. It was really bad. Erica says, oh, you need to watch Superstore. I've heard that. I feel like I just heard that the season, like they were airing their last season or something. Where is that available? Beth is her name. Thank you, Erica. I don't know why she just doesn't seem like a Beth to me. You know, I'm trying to think what name I would want to give her. I feel like Eleanor. Something that's sort of like, because she has a feeling of like, not haughtiness, that's the wrong word, but there's like sort of an aristocratic vibe to her. And I feel like I want sort of like a Victorian lady's name, to sort of contrast with like her cool hip vibe. Anyway, so yeah, we never see Heather and Beth up there together, and I really wanted to. I was sort of interested, but yeah, what can you do? And then the episode like ends with Paula confessing to all of them that this was supposed to be like a graduation thing. And they get in touch with Nathaniel, texts Rebecca letting her know. And she comes over and is just like, girl, what the fuck? To Paula, because she didn't invite her to her graduation. And Paula's like, I know, I'm really sorry. I just have trouble with this kind of thing. And this is when Rebecca tells Paula about hooking up with Greg, and we see Nathaniel listening in. And Nathaniel just, you know, he liked Greg, so I'm sure that's also a tough thing, is like wanting something with a person, but also sort of understanding what they see in another person. But yeah, this is meant to be like kind of a moment. And it's just a weird thing where he's super sad and I don't really care that much because, again, I just don't care about this. I care about Rebecca, but these dudes, like, whatever. So yeah, that's the end of the episode. Let's see. Rowan says Eleanor is my sister's name. Oh, Eleanor and Rowan. I like your name too, Rowan. She did say she's real waspy in the ep with Rebecca's mom. That's right. I forgot about that. So yeah, that works. She just doesn't seem like a Beth to me. To me, Beth is like a very soft, feminine, maternal kind of name. And it just doesn't work for her. I think of it, you know, I've known many Beths and they all had this sort of like mom vibe in their way. So yeah, that's the end of the episode. I feel like I missed something somewhere. But I don't think I did. It was just, I don't think I did. It's just weird because I feel like lately I've just been connecting with this less and I feel sad about it. So I think that's why I feel like I missed something, because I feel like I missed something, you know? So, what can you do? I'm very curious though. Let's see. What have I got for the next episode? A week from today. And I'm trying to see if there are any commissions for live watches. Nope, not yet. I'm commissioned up to episode 14. So we'll see how this goes. I'm curious about a live watch though. Oh my God. Samantha says Greg offering to clean Rebecca's baby toys on the floor. Yeah, I forgot about that. And I love how Daryl just doesn't, it doesn't even occur to him what's actually happening here because he's a precious angel. Oh my God. I know what I forgot to talk about, you guys. The fucking photo shoot with Josh in front of the refrigerator. How could I fucking forget that? I loved that so much. I love how supportive everybody is about it. Hector goes and gets a lamp and holds it up so that he's got some other light. And then Heather hangs out in the background so it looks a little bit more candid instead of really staged. And Paula comes in and sees this all going on. And the fact that the focus is not on her makes her really happy. And she's just super pleased with how this whole party is going. It's a great moment. I really enjoy the fact that everybody is supportive of Josh's attempt to become more of an influencer, because influencers get a really bad rap in a lot of ways, and a lot of it is deserved, don't get me wrong. But influencers, it's the sort of thing that's looked down on as being non-work, but it's a really hard thing to pull off. As somebody who just does the bare minimum for marketing for my podcast, it's insane how much goes into shit. And I can't get over the work that goes into being an influencer when I think about filming a video and then the editing of it. And people will post an episode or a video per day. And then people will talk about how oh, you don't have a real job. That's work. I got news for you. That's a lot of fucking work. And you need to know how to do it. People act like you can just pull out your phone camera and just take a video. That's not, no. So I like the fact that that's being treated a little bit more seriously here, even though we do get the dig about the woman that Daryl went on a date with, because that's the flip side of it, is somebody who's just kind of inconsiderate to those around them as a result of wanting to achieve this. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. All right, I'm good now. Thank you again very much to Megan for commissioning this, and I will see you guys in 1 week with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.